Dr. Amanda Sullivan sat in the second row of the Oprah Winfrey Show audience, her medical badge still clipped to the navy blue blazer she had worn directly from the hospital. At 39 years old, she was one of Chicago's most respected oncologists, known for her tireless dedication to cancer patients and her remarkable success rate in treating even the most challenging cases. What the audience didn't know, what her colleagues didn't know, what even her closest friends didn't know, was that the woman who spent her days fighting cancer in others was losing her own battle with the disease she knew better than anyone. The letter she had written to Oprah 3 weeks ago had been composed in her office at 4 a.m., after another sleepless night spent reviewing patient files instead of facing her own diagnosis. How do you explain to someone that you've dedicated your life to healing others, but when faced with your own mortality, you've chosen denial over treatment? How do you admit that the person everyone sees as a fighter has decided to surrender when the fight became personal? The irony wasn't lost on Amanda that she was sitting in an audience listening to stories about courage, while she was living the most cowardly chapter of her own life. 6 months ago, a routine mammogram had revealed what she had spent her career diagnosing in others: stage 3 invasive ductal carcinoma. The same disease she had helped hundreds of women defeat was now growing in her own body, and she had done nothing about it except pretend it wasn't happening. Today's show theme was life's second chances, and Oprah was discussing people who had faced seemingly impossible circumstances and found the strength to fight back. Amanda had been invited as part of the audience after the show's producers had been intrigued by her letter, though they didn't know the full scope of what she was facing. She was supposed to be there as a medical professional, someone who could offer expertise about fighting serious illness. But sitting there, listening to Oprah talk about second chances, Amanda felt like a fraud. How could she offer hope to others when she had given up hope for herself? How could she encourage patients to fight when she had chosen to ignore her own battle entirely? The moment that changed everything came when Oprah asked the audience a question that seemed to cut straight through Amanda's careful façade. How many of you have ever been your own worst enemy? How many of you have stood in the way of your own healing, your own happiness, your own second chance? Amanda's hand went up automatically, thinking of all the patients she had counseled about self-care, about fighting for themselves, about believing they were worth saving. But then she realized that Oprah was looking directly at her, and something in the talk show host's eyes suggested that she sensed there was more to Amanda's story than appeared on the surface. Oprah walked over to Amanda's row with that intuitive grace that had made her America's most trusted storyteller, understanding somehow that this woman's presence in the audience carried weight beyond what was visible. "What's your name, honey?" Oprah asked, settling into a chair that had been brought over, sensing that this conversation would need careful attention. "Dr. Amanda Sullivan," she replied, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone who had spent years delivering difficult news with calm professionalism. "I'm an oncologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital." "An oncologist," Oprah repeated, and something in her tone suggested she was beginning to understand why Amanda's story might be important. "You help people fight cancer?" "Yes," Amanda replied simply. "I've been treating cancer patients for 12 years. It's been my life's work." The studio was quiet, sensing that there was more to this story than a simple introduction. Oprah had spent decades envying people, and she could tell when someone was carrying something heavy, something that needed to be shared. "Dr. Sullivan," Oprah said gently, "what made you write to me?" That's when Amanda's professional composure began to crack. For 6 months, she had maintained perfect control at work, continued seeing patients, continued offering hope and treatment plans, and encouragement. But something about Oprah's direct question, about being in a space where truth was expected and honored, made her defenses start to crumble. "Because I'm a hypocrite," Amanda said, her voice barely audible at first, then growing stronger as the words began to pour out. "Because I spend my days telling people to fight for their lives, and I'm not fighting for mine." The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators, seemed to sense that something profound was about to be revealed. "What do you mean?" Oprah asked, though something in her expression suggested she was beginning to understand the weight of what Amanda was carrying. Amanda looked around the studio, at the cameras and lights, and hundreds of faces waiting for her to explain herself. For 6 months she had carried this secret alone, had functioned as if everything was normal while her own body was betraying her in the same way she had seen it betray so many of her patients. "6 months ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer," Amanda said, and the words seemed to hang in the air like a confession that changed everything. "Stage 3. The same disease I've spent my career fighting in other people." The audience gasped audibly, understanding immediately the cruel irony of what she was describing. "What's your prognosis?" Oprah asked gently, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that some questions are hard to ask and harder to answer. "With treatment, it's very good," Amanda replied, and for a moment her medical training took over, allowing her to discuss her own case with the same clinical detachment she used when counseling patients. "Chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, the standard protocol I recommend to patients with similar presentations. The 5-year survival rate is over 80%. "That sounds hopeful," Oprah said, but something in her tone suggested she sensed there was more to this story. "It is hopeful," Amanda agreed. "Or it would be, if I were following my own medical advice." The studio was completely silent now, understanding that they were about to hear something that defied logic, something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about human nature and self-preservation. "You're not treating your cancer?" Oprah asked, her voice filled with disbelief and concern. "No," Amanda said simply, and the words seemed to carry the weight of a death sentence she was imposing on herself. "I've done nothing. No chemotherapy. No surgery. Nothing. I've been pretending it doesn't exist." The camera caught the moment when the studio audience realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A doctor who saved lives for a living choosing not to save her own. "Help us understand," Oprah said, leaning forward with the kind of focused attention she reserved for the most important conversations. "You know better than anyone what needs to be done. You've guided hundreds of patients through this same journey. Why won't you take your own advice?" Amanda was quiet for a long moment, struggling to articulate feelings that had driven her to make a decision that everyone around her would consider insane. "Because I can't be weak," she finally said, her voice breaking completely. "Because for 12 years I've been Dr. Sullivan, the one who has answers, who fixes things, who never falls apart when patients and families are falling apart. I can't be the patient. I can't be the one who needs help." The studio audience was beginning to understand that this wasn't about denial or fear of treatment. This was about a woman whose entire identity was built around being strong for others, and who couldn't allow herself to be vulnerable even when her life depended on it. "I've sat with so many patients who've cried, who've been terrified, who've needed me to be strong for them," Amanda continued, tears now streaming down her face. "How can I be the one crying? How can I be the one who's scared? How can I ask my colleagues to take care of me when I'm supposed to be the one taking care of everyone else?" Oprah reached over and took Amanda's hands, understanding that this conversation had moved far beyond medical advice into something much more fundamental about human nature. "And the masks we wear. Amanda," she said, "what do you think would happen if your patients saw you as human as someone who faces the same fears and challenges they do?" "They would lose faith in me," Amanda replied immediately. "They would stop believing that I can help them if they knew I was just as scared and vulnerable as they are." "Is that really what you believe?" Oprah asked gently. "Or is that what you're afraid to out?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything Amanda had built her professional identity around. For 12 years, she had believed that her strength came from being invulnerable, from being the one person in the room who wasn't afraid of cancer. That's when something extraordinary began to happen. From the audience, a voice called out, "Dr. Sullivan?" "Dr. Amanda Sullivan from Northwestern?" The cameras swung toward the voice, revealing a middle-aged black woman who was standing and staring at Amanda with an expression of recognition and overwhelming gratitude. "Yes," Amanda replied, confused but recognizing something familiar in the woman's face. "My name is Patricia Johnson," the woman said, beginning to move toward the front of the studio. "You saved my life 3 years ago. Stage 4 ovarian cancer." Amanda's eyes widened as the memory came flooding back. Patricia had been one of her most challenging cases, a woman who had arrived at the hospital with advanced cancer and very little hope. "Patricia," Amanda said, standing up instinctively as her former patient approached. "How are you?" "I'm cancer-free," Patricia said, reaching the interview area with tears in her eyes. 3 years in remission, thanks to you. "But Dr. Sullivan, when you saved my life, it wasn't because you were strong and fearless. It was because you were honest with me about how scared I should be, and how hard we were going to have to fight together." The reunion that followed was captured by every camera in the studio, but no technology could adequately record the magnitude of what was happening. A doctor was being confronted by the living proof that her humanity, not her invulnerability, was what made her an effective healer. "Dr. Sullivan," Patricia continued, "the day you told me my diagnosis, you cried with me. Do you remember that?" Amanda nodded, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "That's when I knew I was going to fight," Patricia said. "Not because you were strong, but because you showed me that even doctors get scared, and that being scared doesn't mean giving up. It means fighting harder." But the testimonials were just beginning. From another section of the audience, a young Hispanic man stood up. "Dr. Sullivan, it's Carlos Martinez. You treated my mother for lung cancer 2 years ago." Then, an elderly white woman. "Dr. Sullivan, you operated on me for colon cancer. I'm alive because of you." One by one, former patients throughout the audience began identifying themselves as lives Amanda had saved, families she had helped, futures she had preserved through her medical expertise and, more importantly, through her willingness to be human in the face of their fear. The studio audience watched in amazement as more than a dozen people made their way toward the front of the studio, each one representing a story of life preserved, hope restored, families kept whole by a doctor who thought her strength came from being invulnerable. "Dr. Sullivan," said Maria Santos, a woman in her 50s who had survived breast cancer under Amanda's care. "When I was going through chemotherapy, the thing that helped me most wasn't your medical knowledge. Though that was incredible, it was the way you held my hand during the hard moments. The way you let me see that you were human too." Carlos Martinez spoke next. "My mother was terrified of dying, and you didn't give her false hope or pretend everything would be fine. You sat with her fear. You acknowledged it, and that's what gave her the courage to fight." The elderly woman, whose name was Dorothy Chen, added her voice. "Dr. Sullivan, you told me that being afraid didn't make me weak, it made me human. You said that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling afraid and choosing to fight anyway. Now we need you to take your own advice." Oprah watched in amazement as her studio transformed into something that transcended television. A gathering of people whose lives had been saved by a doctor who was now refusing to save herself, all of them united in their determination to convince her that her own life was worth fighting for. "Amanda," Oprah said, "do you see what's happening here? These people aren't grateful greet you because you were invulnerable. They're grateful because you were real, because you met their humanity with your own humanity." Patricia Johnson took charge with the natural leadership of someone who understood the weight of gratitude and the responsibility of speaking for others who had been saved. "Dr. Sullivan," she said, "you taught all of us that cancer doesn't make us weak, it makes us fighters. You taught us that asking for help isn't giving up, it's being smart. You taught us that we are worth fighting for. Now it's time for you to believe that about yourself." The studio audience rose to their feet in applause that wasn't just appreciation for a touching moment, but a collective demand that Amanda apply to herself the same standards she applied to her patients. Maria Santos stepped forward with a proposal that would change everything. Dr. Sullivan, we want to be your support system the way you were ours. We want to sit with you during chemotherapy, hold your hand during the scary moments, remind you that you're worth fighting for. We want to take care of you the way you took care of us, Carlos added. Dorothy Chen, speaking with the authority of someone who had faced death and chosen life, delivered the final argument. Dr. Sullivan, you've saved hundreds of lives. Now let us save yours. Let us show you what it means to be on the other side of the doctor-patient relationship. Let us teach you that being vulnerable doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Oprah turned back to Amanda, who was now surrounded by former patients, all of them offering to walk with her through the journey she had helped them navigate. Amanda, Oprah said, what do you say to that? What do you say to the people whose lives you've saved who are now asking you to save your own? Amanda looked around at the faces surrounding her. Patients she had treated, lives she had preserved, people who existed because she had been willing to fight for them when they couldn't fight for themselves. And for the first time in 6 months, she saw her situation clearly. I say that I've been an idiot, Amanda said, laughing through her tears. I say that I've been so afraid of being weak that I chose to be foolish instead. I say that if I can counsel other people to fight for their lives, I better be brave enough to fight for my own. She turned to face the camera directly, speaking not just to the studio audience, but to every healthcare worker watching who might be struggling with their own version of the invulnerability trap. I say that being human doesn't disqualify me from being a healer, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Being vulnerable doesn't make me a bad doctor. It makes me a real person who happens to be a doctor, and real people deserve to fight for their lives, just as much as anyone else. The show continued for another 30 minutes, with former patients sharing specific memories of how Amanda's humanity had helped them through their darkest moments. They talked about the way she had balanced honesty with hope, how she had never minimized their fears but had also never let them give up. But the most powerful moment came when Oprah asked Amanda to make a commitment on national television. Amanda, Oprah said, I want you to promise these people, and yourself, that you'll start treatment, that you'll fight for your life the way you've taught them to fight for theirs. Amanda looked around the studio one more time, at the former patients who had become her advocates, at Oprah who had created the space for this transformation, at the cameras that would carry this moment to millions of viewers. I promise, she said, and for the first time in 6 months, Dr. Amanda Sullivan made a medical decision about her own case. I promise I'll call my oncologist tomorrow and start treatment. I promise I'll fight for my life the way I've taught all of you to fight for yours. The studio erupted in applause, but more than that, it erupted in relief. The collective sigh of people who had watched someone they cared about choose life over fear, vulnerability over false strength. The episode aired 4 weeks later, and the response was unprecedented. Medical schools across the country began incorporating discussions about fission vulnerability and self-care into their curricula. The American Medical Association launched a campaign about the importance of doctors seeking treatment when they needed it. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Amanda herself. 2 weeks after the show aired, she sent Oprah a photo from her first chemotherapy session. Surrounded by Patricia, Maria, Carlos, Dorothy, and several other former patients who had kept their promise to support her through treatment. Dear Oprah, she wrote, I wanted you to know that starting treatment was the scariest and bravest thing I've ever done, but I'm not doing it alone. The people whose lives I helped save are now saving mine, and I'm learning that being vulnerable doesn't make me weak, it makes me whole. She described how the experience of being a patient had made her a better doctor, how understanding fear from the inside had given her new tools for helping others face their own diagnoses with courage. Most importantly, Amanda wrote, I'm learning that healers need healing too, and that the strongest thing we can do is admit when we need help. 8 months later, Amanda was featured in a follow-up episode of The Oprah Winfrey Show. She appeared not as someone who had been saved, but as someone who had learned to save herself by accepting help from others. The irony, Amanda told Oprah during her return visit, is that going through treatment as a patient has made me a better oncologist. I understand now what my patients are feeling in ways I never could before. She had completed chemotherapy and surgery successfully, and while she still had radiation treatments ahead of her, her prognosis was excellent. More importantly, she had learned to integrate vulnerability into her practice in ways that made her more effective, not less. I tell my patients now that I'm a cancer survivor too, Amanda said. I tell them that doctors get scared, that medical professionals face the same fears and challenges they do. And instead of losing faith in me, they trust me more because they know I really understand what they're going through. Patricia Johnson, Maria Santos, Carlos Martinez, and Dorothy Chen had all remained close to Amanda throughout her treatment, creating a support network that extended far beyond that single day in the studio. They had formed what they called Amanda's Army, a group dedicated to supporting healthcare workers who were facing their own health challenges. What Dr. Sullivan taught us, Patricia said during the follow-up show, is that taking care of people and taking care of yourself aren't opposites. They're the same thing. You can't give what you don't have. 2 years later, Dr. Amanda Sullivan is cancer-free and has become a national advocate for physician wellness and mental health. She speaks at medical conferences about the importance of vulnerability in healing, both for patients and for healthcare providers. The most important lesson I learned, Amanda reflects, is that strength isn't about being invulnerable. It's about being willing to be vulnerable when vulnerability is what's needed. It's about knowing when to be the doctor and when to be the patient, and understanding that both roles require courage. She still practices oncology, but now with a deeper understanding of what it means to be on both sides of a cancer diagnosis. Her patients often comment on her ability to meet them exactly where they are emotionally, to balance medical expertise with human understanding. The support group she formed with her former patients continues to meet monthly, now expanded to include other healthcare workers who are facing their own health challenges. They call themselves Healers Helping Healers, and their motto is simple: even doctors need doctors. I spent 12 years believing that my job was to be strong for everyone else, Amanda says. What I learned is that real strength comes from knowing when to ask for help, when to admit you're scared, when to let other people take care of you. The people I thought I was protecting by being invulnerable were actually waiting for me to be real with them. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about people who never fall down, but about people who learn to fall gracefully and get back up with help. Sometimes healing isn't about being strong enough to do everything alone, but about being brave enough to let others walk alongside you through the darkness. Dr. Amanda Sullivan learned that lesson in a television studio, surrounded by people whose lives she had saved, who were now determined to save hers in return. And in learning to be vulnerable, she discovered that she hadn't lost her power as a healer. She had finally found it.